Hi, so I'm making this video to basically think around the whole, journey throughout 2018, um, what I've been to, um, things that I was able to do in terms of, things I think I achieved, and, like also things that I think I really need to work on for next year. So this is more like a high level, overview of what was or what is 2018 for me. Um, I guess 2018 has been one hell of a ride. So many things happened. Actually, don't know where to start. Um, and yeah, so um, where should I start? That's the question. So I do want to do a lot of stuff for 2018. We always want to be productive. We want to do a lot of stuff. We want to make sure we're doing great. We keep on telling ourselves that um, we're gonna get better. Um, yeah, things around that. Okay, so I guess in terms of technology, three things I would say I really improved on this year is that first thing I think I personally believe my soft skills um, became better. So like, given that I'm currently in a country where I didn't really grew up here nor lived here for a very long time. I've been here many times in terms of just visiting, um, but it marks as my second full year of living here in Australia, and yeah, I think you know it took me a while. Obviously, just like everything, it takes time to build up those skills, those gaps that I was able to identify when I moved here. Um, Although I know how to speak English, I know how to think in English, I know how to write in English, but also listen people speaking English, but like it's still different. Um, like there are still a lot of things um, that you just really learn along the way. There's also that part of working with people, understanding their feelings, their goals, their intents, and often not, you know, having a misconception on what they really meant. Um, so yeah, I think this year I really gauged a lot of that, you know, um, knowledge or sort of experience.
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, what was that? Yeah, I get a lot of that experience this year, being involved with a lot of people, being involved with speaking in community, doing talks, doing presenting in conferences. Yeah, I do really miss that. Um, Sorry, I don't. What I meant is I learned a lot from that. So second part I would say is blockchain. Um, no, like I've been into blockchain for quite some time now, and it's something I really am passionate about up until now, despite the the drop in terms of the hype cycle. That like now is the time when people are understanding blockchain around more on the technology use case rather than the cryptocurrency, which is something I like, or the way I see it, it's a positive change. Um, yeah. Then, like obviously, I've been to, exploring in that space through different channels, through different set of people, And yeah, looking at it from where it was 3 to 4 years ago, um, this space really matured. You know, um, back then it was a tight concept or a very high barrier of entry to understand or join into coming from a developer. But now there are a lot of tools available now that allows developer to sort of like get into it and um, start using the platform. And speaking of platform, there are now a lot of different platforms, and there emerge different mechanisms, different ways of doing it. Um, and probably at the last part of blockchain, I think I really like that those this is quite mixed. That a lot of those big companies are actually adopting it. Like the whole premise of blockchain from the beginning, or more of like cutting the middleman. But obviously, those kind of movements, I personally believe, won't happen overnight, where it's really gonna take a lot of time to go into that direction. Where the way I see it now is a lot of those businesses or companies are actually leveraging it so that you can bridge those trust gap between different companies, you know, so that you can actually have transparency, making sure the data are tamper proof, and it's scalable in a way that it's decentralized, so no um, central body is actually controlling the infrastructure around it. Um, yeah, so that's why there are different mechanisms now on where you can actually use cloud to host your blockchain network. Um, I personally see it's still in the works. So because what these cloud providers want to do is they want to sort of like subsidize or commoditize blockchain in a way that you you can skip different aspects of it, or different layers, such that you can actually um, there's an offering where you can have a template where you can have that whole infrastructure as a service right available, um, wherein if you don't have that, what you'll do is you're gonna start with creating virtual machines, setting up those nodes, and making sure those nodes actually interact and agree in a consortium in a way that depending on what blockchain platform you're trying to build. um, then on the other hand, there are now this different managed, the term is managed blockchain, wherein you focus on creating applications, or in this case smart contracts, on top of the infrastructure, so that you don't actually that you can actually like leverage a platform that's already sitting on top of blockchain, instead of you focusing your effort on setting up those infrastructure, making sure the nodes are correct, and stuff like that. And so the focus now is more on the smart contract aspect and the integrations among different consortium members. So yeah, I really like where it's heading. Although at this point there's a lot of limitations and a lot of questions, um, and a lot of different testing or examples, or different trials that needs to be done. But overall, I think it's really going on a very good direction. Yeah. So I think the key there is, if blockchain becomes more accessible to developers, I think it's really gonna pave um, pave the way. Yeah. And the third part of like learning from this year is mobile development in general. So I've been doing mobile development for quite some time. I think, yeah, it started during 2010, doing Android development. Then on 2011, there becomes the Windows Phone. Then on 2012, 2013, that's where I get interested into different flavors, such as, I ventured into iOS development. Then I went into different paradigms, such as the cross-platform and hybrid, approach. Wherein in the hybrid space, there was, what was that? Ionic, it's something you build on top of, you leverage it using your Angular code, or you're from web app, making it a hybrid app that's gonna be compatible for your mobile app. It's basically a wrapper. You wrap your mobile app into a responsive web view. And then fast forward, I've also been involved with Cordova. It's kind of similar um, to Ionic in a way that it's still a wrapper of a web app in a responsive manner. Probably the difference is that Cordova actually exposes some of the native APIs or native SDKs, or available for those platforms, such as location, camera, and different stuff. Then there goes the um, cross-platform native frameworks. Um, on an honorable basis, I would really say I was deeply involved with Xamarin. Um, Even when it wasn't a cross-platform technology yet, during Xamarin Forms, I was already involved with the native Xamarin wrapper of native iOS and native Android. Hence, you have that Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android, sort of like a native wrapper, so that you can leverage the same APIs available from iOS and Android, but you code and leverage the .NET framework. So, which is a very good thing, coming from a guy who did Windows Phone, WPF, and and desktop apps and web apps using ASP.NET. So that's why it's a natural shift for me to do Xamarin. So like I was able to leverage all those goodness and richness from those .NET libraries that's been there for a while, such as cryptographies, um, integrations with Azure, integrations with Active Directory, those different mature component libraries that's been there for a while. Um, yeah, but this year it's quite different. I've been in I've been into React Native space for this year, and at first, it's kind of like really challenging, um, because JavaScript is my like second preferred language of choice, back then and probably up until now, um, because like I'm really into C sharp, or in .NET. That the way I see JavaScript is something that's not that rich, or that's not that solid in terms of libraries and stuff like that. But when I had a hands-on experience with React Native, that's when I actually saw the real potential. I saw it even last year, even way before. I think around 2016. But this is the year when I took it seriously and I really worked on it on a production ready environment. And I saw a lot of those different challenges, and as well as you know um, things that we actually solved using React Native, that actually gave us a lot of um, hard time when we were doing it through native or Xamarin or different technologies. So yeah, this year I really learned a lot about React Native, and I also learned that how much, in terms of how intense or how insane the um, the amount of libraries available in npm. Like that's something I uh, just like an oversight that I'm not really noticing for the past years, but really, so it's a very huge set of components or libraries available in npm, which is really fascinating. Yeah, so that's why there's a big community around the JavaScript space and in React Native, and yeah, so that's really awesome. Um, what as part of it though is as companies actually geared towards this whole agile movement, or DevOps transformation, you actually need to follow the same trend, or else you might be using a breaking change, or sorry, you might be missing a breaking change. So what that means is that an experience we had with React Native is that you need to make sure that those components that you are dependent to, you need to, you also have a shared responsibility to make sure that you're using the components wisely. Like instead of just being a full consumer of that of those components, you actually evaluate the readiness of those components, if they're really something you can do, you want to consume, or probably it makes sense to just do it yourselves. um, yes, then a lot of those lessons is that like with React Native, it's not as fast as native is, in terms of API availabilities. So, when iOS 12 was released, Android 8 and 9, um, there are those instances where, like you really need to understand how the native components work, or else you can't just rely on the abstracted layer of it, or else you might actually see or like notice that it's not behaving as what you intend to. And I think that's one lesson I also want to say for mobile developers out there, that you're just this different cross platform frameworks, you're literally just abstracting some of those things so that you don't actually do them separately or do them themselves. So, but then there will come to a point where like different variants of, like, say it only works on Android, it only works on iOS, and that's when you actually try and realize that you do need to know how the native code works, and it's just that you're trying to share the responsibility from that shared layer of the way it's going to be implemented, but the underlying implementation or the underlying infrastructure for it to work is still the same native code. So what that means is that if you go beyond doing UI or doing components, that's when you actually realize that to go further, you really need to learn the internals of iOS and Android or other platforms that you're targeting. So yeah, that's really a big lesson for me this year. Um, so where I'm coming into is that React Native is great. Same with Flutter, Xamarin, um, and also Flutter is a very compelling tool or framework to use because of its very native and very consistent UI and UX aspect of it. But then what I'm saying is that regardless of what framework you use on top of it, or what cross-platform strategy you want to use, you still need to have at least the basic understanding of how that targeted platform works. So um, what that means is, say in the concept of React Native, you need to understand how JavaScript works, Then you need to understand how React works. So what's how React renders elements. Then if you're venturing to different patterns and technologies, just like what we did, we also use TypeScript and Redux. So that's already four things you need to understand. But then on top of it all, you also need to understand how iOS works. So that means you need to learn the tooling, which is Xcode, and the language, which most likely will be Objective C. Even though there's some stuff available for Swift, still a lot of those components or a lot of those available libraries are written in Objective C, and I think it's not gonna change sometime soon. And that means you also need to learn Swift. So let's say that's already six. Then for Android, then there's that aspect that you need to learn, the massive Android API, or the whole massive ecosystem of Android. Um, then obviously you also need to learn Java. So all in all, in doing React Native, you probably need to have at least eight different concepts. That's something you want to understand if you really want to have the full flexibility or full you know, leverage power on your application. So that's eight. Um, but then at the same time, um, with that you can actually it, you know, just like everything else, it's something you just need to learn. And once it's a knowledge that's learned around the team, it becomes more natural, and you know, people will understand those patterns and people will write it. Then there are different aspects of it as well, you know, like you also need to understand testing. You also need to understand how, you know, testing in unit testing in Jest or other tools. You also need to understand the you know, the DevOps pipeline. So really, it's a much more sophisticated avenue now compared to where it was 5 or 6 years ago, where everything is just a bit of silo of like, oh, this is how it should just work. And you just need to follow this API, this design language. Oh, don't even get me started with those design language. You know, that's also another thing to consider, like your own branding, your own UI. Um, yeah, but again, that's something I really learned this year, and it's a wealthy experience. Yeah, that, you know, I'm fortunate enough to actually learn them. So yes, I guess that's it. So probably for 2019, what I'm looking forward to is I'm gearing towards learning more around the space of AI, you know, with machine learning and deep learning and all those different facets around it. Um, Also, I want to learn more about containers and Kubernetes in particular, and different technologies around that. So I do have fundamental knowledge of those, but it's something I kind of like want to focus on for next year, and let's see how it goes. Okay. All right. Thanks. Bye.